The cold, sterile walls of the Nexus station pulsed with quiet efficiency. Hundreds of species from across the galaxy moved in and out of its vast docking bay, most ignoring each other as they passed by, members of 1,000 different species on 1,000 different missions. A distant hum of conversation, in 100 languages, echoed throughout the station, but all that noise was dwarfed by the thunderous energy brewing in the heart of one small corner of the station. "Captain, we're getting something strange," reported the young officer, Maris, her fingers flying over her console with such speed that even the most advanced of alien technologies would struggle to keep up. Captain Asha Cole glanced over her shoulder. She was an imposing figure, standing tall with her black jumpsuit emblazoned with the insignia of the Earth Defense Fleet. Her broad shoulders and strong jaw were the perfect match for her reputation, a leader who had faced the horrors of war, space piracy, and politics, all while keeping her sense of humor intact. Today, however, her usual calm was being tested. "Strange how, Lieutenant?" she asked, her voice a sharp contrast to the steady hum of the station. Maris hesitated for a moment, eyeing the data that scrolled across her terminal. "It's a distress signal, Captain. Originating from the planet Thalox Prime. They're calling for help, but there's something off about the transmission. It's human." The words hung in the air like a punchline no one was ready for. "Human?" Captain Cole repeated, a flicker of disbelief crossing her expression. "Yes, ma'am. It's definitely human," Maris confirmed, her voice a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "The signal is encrypted with a kind of Earth military coding. We've never seen anything like it before." Asha frowned, eyes narrowing as she stepped forward. She didn't need to be told to activate the ship's secure communications. The distress signal was coming from a planet that Earth had no claim to, a far-flung world at the edge of known space. There had been no human colonies there, no Earth presence, so why was a human distress call coming from the middle of nowhere? "We need to investigate this," she said, more to herself than anyone else. She pressed a button on the console, sending a direct line to the fleet commander. "This is Captain Asha Cole. I need to speak with Commander Darius." Moments later, the face of Commander Darius filled the screen. A gruff, no-nonsense leader, his heavy brow furrowed as he processed Asha's words. "You're telling me a human distress call came from Thalox Prime?" His voice was thick with skepticism. "I thought that place was abandoned." "It was. And it still should be," Asha replied. "But the signal is human, Commander. It's encrypted with military-level codes. If someone's out there, we need to find out who, and why." The commander remained silent for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Cole. Get a team together. You have my authorization to investigate. But keep it quiet, this could be a trap, and I don't need anyone else knowing about it." "Understood," Asha said. "We'll leave immediately." The transmission ended, and she turned back to her crew, already formulating a plan. The Nexus station was a hub for all kinds of mercenaries, traders, and military personnel from all over the galaxy. She could already feel the tension in the air as the news spread. Everyone would be speculating, everyone would have their own theories. But one thing was certain, Asha Cole wasn't about to let the signal go unanswered. She headed to the hangar, where her ship, the Odyssey, was waiting. A sleek, formidable vessel built for speed and combat, it was her pride and joy. The crew of the Odyssey was small but experienced, each of them had been through hell and back, but none of them had ever faced a mystery quite like this one. They were about to venture into a dark corner of space that hadn't seen human life in decades. "Everyone on board?" she asked as she stepped onto the ship, her boots clicking against the metal floor. "All systems are operational, Captain," Lieutenant Rykos, the ship's engineer, replied, his voice a mixture of confidence and curiosity. "If there's anything out there to find, we'll find it." "Good," she said, settling into the captain's chair. "Get us to Thalox Prime. And don't let anyone know we're going." The rest of the crew filed in, each of them looking a bit more tense than usual. Asha had always been the kind of leader who trusted her team, and they had never let her down before. But this mission, this strange, unexplained distress call, was unlike anything they had ever encountered. The Odyssey powered up, its engines roaring to life. Asha's hand hovered over the controls as the ship lifted off, heading toward the unknown. Meanwhile, on the surface of Thalox Prime, a much smaller and more peculiar scene was unfolding. A small group of beings, non-human, had gathered around a large, cylindrical device buried deep in the planet's jungle. The device had been silent for eons, its purpose lost to time. It was a relic from an ancient war, an artifact of a past that no one had ever truly understood. Now, however, something was stirring within it. The device began to hum faintly, its systems coming back online after centuries of dormancy. It wasn't a sign of life, not yet, but it was the beginning of something far more dangerous. One of the creatures, an insectoid species with elongated limbs and glowing blue eyes, hissed as it approached the device. Its antennae twitched as it carefully inspected the readings on its console. "It's activated," it said, its voice sharp and alien. Another of the group, a towering, reptilian figure with scales like polished obsidian, shifted, staring down at the device. "What now?" it growled in a voice that was both guttural and smooth. "Now," the insectoid said, "we wait." But in the back of its mind, a dark suspicion lingered. This was no ordinary signal. There was something else beneath it, a strange, unyielding presence that it could not yet identify. Something human. Back aboard the Odyssey, the crew braced themselves as the ship neared the coordinates. "Captain, we're entering the planet's atmosphere," Maris called out from the communications station. "I'm detecting unusual readings on the surface. It's not just the distress signal. There's something else. Something old." Asha's pulse quickened. The situation was starting to feel more like a trap than a rescue mission. The silence from Thalox Prime had been unsettling enough, but the strange energy readings were a new wrinkle. "We need to be careful," Asha ordered. "Prepare for landing. And Maris, keep monitoring the signal. I want to know the moment it changes." The Odyssey broke through the planet's clouds, revealing the lush, overgrown jungle below. Towering trees and thick foliage stretched out as far as the eye could see. The planet seemed untouched by civilization, or at least, it had been. As the ship touched down on the soft, wet earth, Asha stood up and addressed her crew. "Stay sharp. We don't know what we're walking into. But whatever it is, we need to find the source of that signal. Let's move out." The air outside was thick and humid, the heat palpable even through their suits. The jungle seemed eerily quiet, the only sounds being the faint rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of creatures that Asha couldn't begin to identify. "Something's not right," Rykos muttered under his breath, his hand on the weapon at his side. Asha nodded, her instincts on high alert. She gestured for the team to move forward, every step taking them deeper into the jungle. Each rustle in the trees, each crack of a branch, had them looking over their shoulders. They knew that something was waiting for them, something that didn't want to be found. They just didn't know what yet. The jungle on Thalox Prime had a strange, oppressive air that clung to the crew of the Odyssey like a second skin. As they trudged through the dense foliage, each step seemed heavier than the last. The underbrush was thick with vines and strange plant life, making navigation slow and treacherous. The distant hum of the distress signal was the only thing keeping them oriented, though it had grown fainter since their arrival. Asha's eyes narrowed, her instincts warning her that something was off. "Maris," she called, her voice sharp. "Any change in the signal?" Maris, hunched over her portable terminal, looked up with a frown. "No, Captain. It's still human, but..." She hesitated, pressing a few more keys. "It's pulsing irregularly now. Like something is interfering with it." Asha didn't like that one bit. The signal had started strong, an unmistakable call for help. Now, it seemed as though it was being manipulated, its integrity slowly unraveling. The idea of interference, something deliberately trying to mask or alter the message, sent a chill down her spine. "We need to pick up the pace," she said, turning back to the group. "Whatever's out here, it's already starting to notice us." They continued onward, pushing through the ever-thickening brush. The further they ventured into the jungle, the stranger it became. The plants were unlike any Asha had ever seen, tall, thorny, and covered in glowing patches that pulsated faintly, as if they too were somehow alive. It wasn't just the flora that was odd, the air felt heavier, charged with an almost palpable energy. "I've never seen anything like this," Lieutenant Rykos muttered as he brushed aside a thick vine, revealing a patch of ground that seemed unusually dry compared to the damp surroundings. "This place is unnatural." "I know," Asha replied, her voice tinged with unease. "Something's not right here. Stay alert." The team moved on, their boots crunching against the thick undergrowth. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to change. The once steady hum of the signal began to warp, fluctuating erratically, as if it were being stretched thin by some invisible force. "Captain," Maris spoke again, voice tight with concern. "The signal, it's getting stronger, but not in a good way. It's like it's warping, pulling us in." Asha halted. The sense of danger had always been present, but now it was undeniable. "We need to find its source, fast. We're too exposed out here." As if on cue, the ground beneath them shuddered. The trees swayed, the strange glow from the plants flickering as though caught in an invisible wind. The crew instinctively drew their weapons, their eyes scanning the surroundings, searching for any movement. There was a sudden stillness, a pause in the jungle that felt wrong. Then, the ground split open. A jagged crack appeared in the earth, a massive rift forming beneath their feet. The jungle trembled violently as the crack spread, and a loud, mechanical groan echoed from deep within the chasm. It was as if the planet itself was alive and protesting their presence. "Move! Get back!" Asha shouted, but her voice was drowned out by the deafening noise of the shifting earth. The crack widened, and something began to emerge from below. A massive, dark shape, something that had been buried for centuries, slowly rose from the depths, its outline barely visible against the backdrop of the jungle's eerie glow. "What the hell is that?" Lieutenant Rykos shouted, eyes wide with fear. Asha's heart pounded as she looked up at the massive structure now rising from the ground. It was mechanical in nature, but ancient. A relic of a time long past, its surface etched with strange markings and alien symbols. It resembled a giant, broken obelisk, cracked and battered from years of neglect, but still clearly functional. "It's a ship," Maris breathed, staring in disbelief. Asha squinted, her mind racing. Not a ship, a weapon. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. The ancient device beneath them was not a relic, it was a weapon of war. And it was waking up. A deep hum emanated from the device, growing louder and more intense with each passing second. The air was vibrating now, as if charged with energy, the atmosphere crackling with static. The trees shook, and the ground beneath them continued to tremble. "What do we do now?" Maris asked, her voice shaking. "Retreat," Asha snapped, her tone hard and commanding. "Now." But before they could turn, a new sound cut through the air, a high-pitched whine, like the scream of a dying animal. A dark, thick mist began to pour from the rift, enveloping them in a swirling cloud of dense, choking vapor. The mist seemed to be alive, creeping along the ground like tendrils of smoke, slithering around their legs, making the air thick and suffocating. "Captain, we can't see!" Rykos yelled, his voice strained. "We have to move!" Asha shouted, her heart racing. She knew they couldn't stay in this mist for long. If the weapon was truly waking, they wouldn't be safe for much longer. "Stick together, and keep your comms open." With weapons drawn, they began to move in the direction they hoped was safe, but the mist was disorienting. It clung to their suits, making the air feel like it was pressing in on them from all sides. Every breath was a struggle, and the oppressive, unnatural pressure of the planet seemed to heighten their anxiety. They stumbled forward, relying on the faint pulse of the distress signal and the occasional flicker of the glowing plants to guide them. But the deeper they went, the more they realized they weren't alone. Shapes, blurred, indistinct, moved through the mist, just out of clear sight. They could hear the rustle of movement, the sound of something large and heavy shifting through the fog. It was too dark to make out details, but Asha could feel the eyes on them, watching, waiting. And then they saw it. A humanoid figure, cloaked in shadows, emerged from the mist. It stood at least 7 feet tall, its body covered in shimmering scales, eyes glowing a bright, unnatural blue. It was unlike any species Asha had encountered before. Its presence was terrifying, and for a moment, all the crew could do was stare. The creature didn't speak. It didn't need to. It raised a weapon, long and cylindrical, crackling with an energy that mirrored the strange hum from the device behind them. Asha's heart raced. They were being hunted. "Open fire," she commanded, her voice steady, even as the situation spun into chaos. She pulled her blaster from its holster and aimed, taking the first shot before the creature could react. The beam hit, but it didn't penetrate. The creature seemed to absorb the energy, its body shimmering with an almost liquid motion. It was more than just alien, it was something entirely other. The jungle exploded into action as more figures emerged from the mist, more of the same, towering and imposing, their eyes burning with a cold, predatory gleam. They moved with terrifying precision, faster than the crew could react, closing in from all sides. Asha fired again, but it was clear they were outmatched. The situation had gone from bad to worse, and they were quickly running out of time. "Retreat!" Asha ordered, her voice sharp and desperate. "Back to the ship, now!" The crew spun and dashed toward the Odyssey, the creatures hot on their heels. The jungle seemed to close in around them, the mist thicker, the air heavier. Asha's breath came in ragged gasps as they sprinted, the sound of pounding feet echoing in the silent jungle. The ship was still a distance away, but it felt like it might as well have been light years. Every step was a battle, every breath a fight for survival. The creatures were relentless, closing in on them, their weapons crackling with deadly energy. Asha's mind raced. They couldn't outrun them, couldn't fight them, not like this. They needed to think fast, but the weight of the situation was crushing. And then, through the haze, Asha spotted something that made her heart skip a beat. The Odyssey. But it was no longer just the ship. It was a target. The mist parted, and the weapon in the creature's hand flared with an intense, blinding light. The ship was in their sights. The battle for survival had just begun. The Odyssey gleamed ahead, standing tall amidst the swirling mist of the jungle, but the safety of the ship now felt distant, unreachable. Asha's heart pounded in her chest, and her thoughts raced. The creatures closing in on them weren't just aggressive, they were organized. They had weapons, tactics, and were moving with purpose. Her team had been outmatched from the start, and now, with the Odyssey under direct threat, the stakes were higher than ever. "Captain, they're closing in," Maris shouted, her voice tight with panic. She had just fired a warning shot into the air, but the strange creatures didn't flinch. Their eerie, glowing blue eyes locked onto her, calculating and cold. "Keep moving," Asha barked, grabbing Maris by the arm and pulling her toward the ship. But they were barely making any ground. The dense foliage made every step feel like a drag, the mist clinging to them, slowing them down. And the creatures, tall, armored, and unfazed by their gunfire, were gaining. Asha's mind raced. They couldn't keep running forever. The Odyssey was their only chance, but it was still too far away. The creatures were relentless, and there were too many of them. They reached a narrow path leading out of the dense jungle, a small clearing that might give them a better line of sight to the ship, but the moment they stepped into the open, everything changed. The creatures let out a strange, guttural roar, signaling the others. In an instant, the first line of attackers split into 2 groups. One of them, a hulking creature with an enormous weapon that resembled a plasma cannon, charged toward the crew, its eyes fixed on Asha. "Take cover," she shouted, shoving Rykos to the ground as the beast fired. A blinding flash of light tore through the air, narrowly missing them. The ground beneath them erupted in a burst of fire and dirt, the shockwave sending them all stumbling. Asha rolled to the side, instinctively pulling her blaster from its holster and returning fire. The plasma bolts crackled across the clearing, but the creature was fast, dodging the shots with an unnatural agility. "Rikos," she shouted, as she saw the engineer pulling himself from the ground, dazed but unharmed. "Cover us." Without missing a beat, Rikos pulled a device from his belt, something cobbled together from parts of the Odyssey's engine systems. He pressed a button, and a series of small drones shot out of the device, buzzing toward the attacking creatures. They swarmed around the hulking alien, distracting it for a moment. "Now's our chance," Asha shouted. The team sprang into action, pushing forward toward the Odyssey, which was still 100 yards away. But the creatures were closing in too quickly. Another burst of plasma fire lit up the clearing, this time hitting one of the drones mid-flight, sending it spiraling out of control and crashing into the ground. It didn't take long for the attackers to adapt. They were learning. "Incoming!" Maris yelled, pointing toward the sky. Asha didn't need to look up to know what she was talking about. The creatures weren't just using brute force, they were coordinating their attacks. In the distance, a second wave of attackers was descending from above, a squadron of smaller, faster figures that had been hiding in the trees. They had deployed some kind of flying devices, gliding, insect-like crafts that hovered over the team with precision. "Captain, we're running out of time," Lieutenant Rikos said, his voice tight with fear. "They've already disabled our drones. If we don't get to the ship, we're done for." Asha's mind clicked into overdrive. The creature's strategy was becoming clearer. They weren't just hunting, they were herding them, funneling them toward a trap. "Rikos, can you get the ship's systems online from here?" she asked, her gaze sweeping over the horizon. The creature's attack was starting to feel like a well-coordinated siege. "I can try," Rikos said, fingers flying over his wrist console, tapping into the Odyssey's systems remotely. "But it's going to take time. They've been jamming our signals." "Time is something we don't have," Asha interrupted. She looked at Maris, who was standing next to her, weapons drawn but trembling. The young officer's face was pale, her breath coming in sharp gasps as the weight of their situation hit her all at once. "You're not just going to stand here, Maris," Asha snapped. "Get to the ship, now." The officer hesitated, and Asha's jaw tightened. She could see the fear in Maris's eyes, the same fear that gripped the whole crew. They weren't just facing an enemy, they were facing something they couldn't understand, something ancient and unknowable. But this was no time for hesitation. Maris nodded, pushing forward with a burst of energy, sprinting toward the ship with all the remaining strength she had. Asha followed close behind, her eyes scanning for any sign of movement. She could see the ship now, so close, yet still so far. The mist seemed to close in, thickening and swirling, making it harder to breathe. The air was thick with static, the hair on the back of Asha's neck rising. A plasma bolt slammed into the ground beside them, sending them both tumbling to the dirt. Asha hit the ground hard, her head ringing as she rolled to her feet, eyes darting to find Maris. The young officer was crouched nearby, her face pale as she struggled to stand. "Get up!" Asha shouted, grabbing Maris by the arm and hauling her to her feet. "We have to move." The alien creatures were closing in. The hulking beast with the plasma cannon was only a few feet away, its heavy steps shaking the ground beneath them. Another smaller creature, faster and more agile, darted forward with a pair of curved blades, slicing through the air in a series of deadly arcs. "Run!" Asha yelled. She pushed Maris ahead, forcing her to sprint toward the Odyssey. They were almost there, only a few more yards, but the pressure was mounting. The creatures were circling, preparing to make their final move. "Captain, I've got a lock on the ship's systems," Rikos shouted through their comms. "Engines are coming online. I just need another minute." "1 minute we don't have," Asha snapped. "We can't wait any longer." Ahead, the Odyssey loomed large, its silhouette barely visible through the mist. The creatures were closing in from every angle, leaving no escape. Asha knew they couldn't fight their way out, not without reinforcements, not without a better plan. "Maris, get to the ship," she shouted. "I'll hold them off." Maris hesitated, her eyes wide with fear, but Asha shoved her forward again. The young officer didn't protest this time. She was already moving, the realization that the captain was buying her time forcing her to push on. Asha turned, facing the oncoming wave of alien attackers. She raised her blaster, aiming for the leader of the creatures, the one with the plasma cannon. Her hand trembled, but she didn't lower her weapon. If this was going to be her last stand, she would make it count. The creature's glowing eyes locked onto her, and for a fleeting moment, Asha saw something. There was intelligence behind those eyes, understanding. These beings were not just mindless killers. They were something worse, hunters. And in that moment, Asha understood. The signal, human, distorted, and manipulated, hadn't been a cry for help. It had been a lure. For them. The ground beneath her feet trembled once again, but Asha steadied herself. She was outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. But she would not go down without a fight. The creatures were almost upon her. She raised her blaster. And then, there was a sudden burst of light. A shockwave hit her from behind, and she was thrown forward, her vision momentarily fading to white. Something had come. Something, or someone. The creatures froze. Asha's mind raced as she scrambled to her feet. What was happening? What had just intervened? But then she saw it. Above the trees, descending slowly like a ghost through the mist, was another ship. Not just any ship. A ship that looked human. But the question remained, why had it come? And what had it come for? The battle was far from over. The ship descending through the mist was unlike any Asha had ever seen. Its silhouette was sleek, angular, and intimidating, its hull dark and matte, with no markings or insignia to indicate its origin. It hovered effortlessly above the jungle, cutting through the thick fog like a blade. The creatures, previously closing in on her team, froze at the sight of the craft. For a brief moment, the jungle went still, as if the very planet itself was holding its breath. Asha barely had time to process what was happening when the ship's underside split open with a loud, mechanical hiss. From within, a glowing blue light illuminated the fog, casting strange shadows across the jungle floor. Something, or someone, was coming down. Maris, still running toward the Odyssey, didn't look back, too focused on reaching the ship. Asha's eyes, however, remained locked on the descending craft, her mind racing with questions. Was this a rescue? Was this another alien force? Whoever it was, they had just altered the rules of the game. The creatures, standing in their tight formation, seemed to recognize the arrival of the new vessel. There was a shift in their posture, a silent communication passing between them. And then, just as quickly, they began retreating into the jungle, disappearing into the mist as if they had been nothing more than a fleeting shadow. Asha felt her breath catch in her throat. The danger had not passed, but for the first time in what felt like hours, she felt a glimmer of hope. "Captain!" Rykos's voice crackled over the comms. "We're almost there. Engines are online. Just a few more seconds and we can take off." Asha snapped back into focus, her mind shifting from the immediate threat of the creatures to the new, unknown presence above. She glanced at the others. Maris had reached the Odyssey, and Rykos was already preparing to lift off. But there was something in the air, a tension, a deep uncertainty about who, or what, was coming for them. "Get on the ship," Asha said firmly, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to leave, now." She turned and sprinted toward the Odyssey, her boots slamming against the dirt. As she neared the ship, she saw the ramp lowering, the harsh sound of metal grinding against metal filling the air. She could hear the engines whirring, a low, deep hum that resonated through her bones. Maris was already halfway up the ramp, her face drawn and tired. She shot Asha a quick, questioning glance, but Asha didn't have time to explain. She simply nodded and urged her forward. "Go! I'll be right behind you." The ramp closed with a heavy thud, sealing the crew inside the ship, but Asha wasn't ready to leave yet. She looked over her shoulder, watching as the mysterious ship hovered silently above the jungle, its lights flickering like the heartbeat of a predator. A few more seconds. That's all she needed. As if sensing her thoughts, the craft above them suddenly released a burst of energy. A beam of blue light shot down, striking the ground with an intensity that sent a shockwave rippling through the air. The jungle shook violently, the trees around them bending and cracking under the force. The creatures that had been retreating stopped in their tracks, their forms shimmering in the light, as if they were being pulled toward the beam, drawn like moths to a flame. Asha's heart pounded in her chest as she sprinted toward the ramp. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get inside the ship, to escape whatever was unfolding in front of her. But as she reached the base of the ramp, she turned one last time to see the beam of light pull the creatures toward it, their bodies writhing in an almost unnatural manner. The beam intensified, and for a moment, Asha could have sworn she saw something within the mist, a shape, humanoid, large, and glowing, standing just outside the craft. But the moment passed in an instant. A low, guttural sound resonated from the jungle, and the creatures began to disintegrate, their forms collapsing into nothingness as the beam continued its pull. Asha stumbled back, instinctively raising her hand to shield her eyes from the intense light. The air was charged, humming with a strange, electric energy. The creatures had been obliterated, reduced to mere shadows and dust in the span of a few seconds. Asha took one final, reluctant look at the beam. It was over. The creatures were gone. And now, there was only the ship, hovering silently above the jungle. She turned and ran up the ramp into the safety of the Odyssey. The doors sealed shut behind her, and she collapsed into the nearest seat, breathless and disoriented. Maris was already at the controls, Rykos beside her, his fingers flying over the console. "We're taking off, Captain," Rykos said quickly, his voice tense. "But you need to see this." Asha's stomach tightened as she looked toward the viewport. The mysterious ship above them was still there, hovering like a sentinel. And then, as if responding to some unseen command, it began to move. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed, the craft shot into the sky, piercing the thick clouds above with a force that rattled the Odyssey. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, vanishing into the vast emptiness of space. For a long moment, the crew sat in stunned silence. The engines of the Odyssey hummed beneath them, steady and reassuring, but the jungle below them seemed far removed from their immediate reality. The ship's hull was safe, but the mystery of what had just happened lingered in the air like a fog. Asha closed her eyes, feeling the weight of their survival sink in. They had made it, barely. But there was no telling what this all meant. "Captain," Maris said, her voice quieter now, but still filled with an urgency. "What just happened? Who are they? And where did they go?" Asha didn't have an answer. She stared at the stars outside, a cold, empty void stretched out before them. For a long moment, she considered the question. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice steady, though tinged with something darker. "But we're not done yet." Maris looked at her, confused, but Asha shook her head, her thoughts spinning. There was something about that ship, something about what they had just witnessed, that didn't sit right with her. The creatures had been defeated, yes, but the ship's intervention had been too precise, too calculating. And the message, human, distorted, and manipulated, that had lured them here in the first place. Asha's gut told her it hadn't been a coincidence. She stood up, walking to the observation window, staring out into the stars. There was more to this story. Much more. "We've been played," Asha muttered under her breath, a grim realization settling in. "And whoever, whatever, those things were, they're just the beginning." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but Asha's mind was already spinning with plans, with questions. There was a bigger game at play here, and she wasn't about to let the answers slip away into the unknown. "We're going back to Earth," Asha declared, her voice resolute. "We've got a message to send." As the Odyssey turned its engines toward the distant blue planet, Asha's thoughts were already racing. Whatever they had just encountered on Thalox Prime, whatever had just intervened in their survival, it wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning.